Hi, I'm Pam Blizzard from Recovered Peace.
And I'm Lachelle Burkett with Hope Redefined.
And I'm Bonnie Burns of Strong Wives. We're so glad you're joining us.
Welcome to another episode of Hope for Wives. Today, we're going to discuss Discovery Day, one of the most painful days in the life of a wife who discovers her husband has been viewing pornography or is compulsively acting out sexually. The day of discovery is typically called D-Day because, just like the Normandy Beach invasion during World War II, this day is full of death, wounding, and trauma. So ladies, let's just jump right in. And I'd love to hear your answers to how long ago were your D-Days and what comes to mind for you personally when you think of D-Day?
Gosh, my D-Day, it's kind of interesting in our story. Our D-Day was a true confession. My husband came home after a church service that another guy had shared a story, and he had essentially he said, I have a conviction that I've been struggling with porn for quite some time, and I think I'm supposed to join that group. And at that moment, that was really the first time I'd ever heard him talk about pornography, or really that he was struggling with it. But prior to our relationship, we weren't dating as Christians. We weren't believers at that time. And so pornography had been around our relationship. It wasn't necessarily that I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what porn is. I knew what porn was. I just don't think I had the terminology to say struggle. Like, that didn't make sense to me. And I did come from a family that the visual consumption of women was very normal. So porn was familiar. I didn't have the terminology to say, oh, this is struggle. Got it. So my husband stepped into his men's group. He started doing that work. And then about 4.5 months later, he went on a work trip, and he came back from that trip. And by the grace of God, he confessed and said, I slipped. I looked at stuff. And I would tell you that moment was my D-Day. That was where I had the trauma begin to set in, the PTSD that we talk about, all of those things, the explosion of emotions, the rage, the betrayal, all the things, because at that moment in my mind, this was never supposed to happen again. You went to group and that was going to fix this. And I never thought we were going to talk about it again. So my D-Day I felt like when I think about that in my particular story, it felt very drawn out and maybe not quite as traditional as others who walk in and discover something or, have things exposed to them in a really aggressive way.
And how long ago then was that?
So that was 17 years ago.
What about you, Pam?
Well, as I sit here and think about it, I'm thinking about which one, because there were so many. We've been married almost 28 years, and I have to say from day one, there were teeny tiny discoveries of missing time, missing money, words and actions that didn't line up, that didn't make sense. My husband threw up his arms in the air and said, I'm tired of all the lies. A volcano of information came out. Thought I knew it was bad. I didn't know how bad it was. I'm glad you're not asking me on that day, because that day I wouldn't have had words. It was a rush of shock, fear, grief, also a sense of relief. Okay, it makes sense now. So many things make sense now. I'm not crazy. I wasn't imagining things. I'm not an overly suspicious person. Okay, now we know what it is. Now we can do something about it. But of course, that was just the initial moments. And over the next days and weeks, it all started crashing in on me, the reality of what was permanently lost.
So I'm Bonnie, and my first D-Day was early 2000s. So I would say maybe 17 or 18 years ago. And that first D-Day did leave me in some pain, devastating pain. But like you, Lachelle, pornography had kind of been around. We were Christians, and it still had been around. Some of my family members, my husband had been exposed, and even within our marriage, it was something. When things went underground and he became secretive about things, and then I found out, I was hurt, devastated. And so I did a lot of typical things. I tried to control him, watched his every move. I looked at his email account. I was a hawk on the covenant eyes, all of the typical, very normal things. Second D-Day in about 2012, I was just floored. Again, devastating pain, and there was some therapy then, but he wasn't owning. I went the opposite direction. So I went into some denial. This is his deal. He's got to figure it out. So there was some therapy. It wasn't he didn't have a good rapport. So therapy ended within a few months. And again, things went underground. But in the meantime, I had been writing and learning about healthy, godly sexuality. So when it happened again, just 14 months ago, I knew exactly what needed to happen. I was no longer as sad as I was angry. When I personally think of the last D-Day, it's rage for all, like you were saying, Pam, all that was lost, and trying to reformulate our history together. There were so many new pieces to add that I'd never known. That was really hard, assimilating all that stuff, coming to terms with it. It was really hard.
It's interesting that each of us have talked about there being multiple D-days. I always want to speak to that because I know that women who've just found out, hearing that we've got multiple D-days can be downright terrifying, overwhelming. Like, what the heck are you talking about? I'm not doing this again. Can I ask an off-the-cuff question?
Yeah, absolutely.
What made you stay after the second one?
I saw the pattern of his life outside of his sex addiction. He was generous of spirit. He was more generous of spirit outside of the family than inside. And that goes back to, as we're all going to talk about later, the trauma, the wounding from childhood and all that stuff. Right. But the pattern of his life was really a gentle man. I still loved him.
Yeah, I have to say the same thing. I do the reverse. I saw the man underneath the addiction. And I knew that the good man that I fell in love with was underneath all the weeds and vines of addiction that grew over him. And I saw that come out. I saw the glimpses. I saw the brokenness that I needed to see. And so I saw glimpses of that man in there. I'm probably like a lot of people where I'm like, that's it, we're done, I'm gone. Mm-hmm. And then over the next few hours and days, I saw the remorse and the regret and the shame and the brokenness that I needed to see. And so I softened over time. And yeah, I had multiple D-days. And every time I'm like, that's it, we're done, I can't do this anymore. But it is the common experience that I see. It's just the way addiction is. It's a matter of what addiction is all about. And that each successive D-Day was different than the last. And mm-hmm. I learned as time went on how to protect myself from that and how to trust my own wings. And I'm glad I stayed. I'm just going to put that out there. I am very glad that I did stay, learn to recover and work through, because the gifts of my own personal recovery are huge. Amen. And the gifts of our and the gifts of our coupleship recovery, I think, is the way God intended. Now, I wouldn't want anybody to take that just at face value, but our growth together and a growing closer through recovery and dealing with healing from of our personal traumas has been an incredible gift.
Yeah, I think that in one of the books we use in our groups, it's by Vicki Tiede. It's called When Your Husband's Addicted to Pornography. She says in the book, the good ones struggle. And that was a really powerful statement for me when I think about why did I stay? Because I did, even though there was tons of deception, there was lots of lying and hiding and minimizing has been a huge area of us to have to navigate and grow through. But there was some form of wrestle for him. And while there were times where he exhibited worldly sorrow, which is, I got caught and I don't like this, versus godly sorrow, which is just totally broken before the Lord, there was a gamut of that, right? Sometimes it was worldly, sometimes it was godly. But I think that was probably what made me stay in there, was being able to see this brokenness. Because I can totally echo exactly what all you're saying. I'm married to a really great guy and I love him so much. Like, why would I walk out on him? Like, I'm a hot train wreck in my own right. I wanted to be able to be that person. But then there was also, Pam, a lot of what you're saying about coming back in and just realizing, wow, we got to grow in this. And I think that's what I'm excited about with this podcast and being able to have these conversations, is encouraging women, like, there is more than just pain from this journey.
Yes.
There's so much good that is in this that there's no way I would have learned any of this had I not had to go through this. And so I'm just so thankful that we get to just cast this hope like this. So
Thank you.
Same,
Very good.
same here.
Yes.
Same here.
So let's go on to our next little topic here. So we all work with betrayed partners. What patterns do you see in partners immediately after discovery?
Total devastation, total emotional overwhelm, total grief, complete destruction of the personal self. Everything that I experienced, that you all experienced, I can see it where they are in that current moment, and they can't see the way out. They don't know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, or that health and recovery and sanity can be had again. I see the desperation sometimes of, I just want out. I don't want to deal with this. And sometimes they think, well, if I just walk away from this marriage now, I'll not have to deal with this, which we all know isn't true, that even if the relationship ends, we still have our work to do. We still have that loss and that trauma. In fact, we have additional loss and trauma. But I do see the cycles of relapse, the stages spouses go through, because discovery doesn't happen one time, unfortunately. There's a thing called trickle truth. A lot of times they'll be in one stage and get their feet on the ground and then be knocked down to the ground again by new information that was revealed to them. But I see tenderness, I see love, I see women who love their marriages, who love their husbands, love their families. They're looking for any shred of hope, any shred of light. I just can't even see a way of how this can even be salvaged. What do I do? They're completely lost.
Mm-hmm. What I see is a lot of rumination and just, I call it spinning, very rapid fire speech. Their brains are just going in a million different directions. And that's the nature of trauma, right? Because, and I think Lachelle's going to talk a little more about betrayal trauma here. Trauma heightens our awareness for more danger. We have this increased energy, increased thought process to try to identify more danger, because we just had the death of trust. So what else is out there that's going to be dangerous to our relationship?
Mm-hmm. If you're capable of this, what else are you capable of?
Right. And so a lot of ladies come to me, just their brains are on fire with thoughts and what ifs and all that unsettledness.
And the other thing that I see is women understandably wanting to tell you every detail that they know. They need to get it out. They finally have someone that they can talk to that is safe, that understands, that won't try to fix them, or that won't try to shame them or tell them leave. Or just, that's normal, just put up with it, just deal with it. Somebody who finally understands, who can listen, needing to get it all out.
Mm-hmm. And it's very healing to have that witness who's safe, that you can just pour it out to, especially as the three of us, we're partners and APSATS coaches. We understand from the personal perspective, and we also understand a little deeper on the trauma perspective.
Yeah, I was just going to share. So like you mentioned APSATS, and part of what we do through APSATS is the multidimensional partner trauma model. The basis of the way that they implement and bring into practice the healing methods or stages. There's actually stages of safety, remembering a mourning, and reconnection. Bonnie, the question that you've asked is, what patterns do you see in partners immediately after discovery? And I think both of you have done just a beautiful job of articulating the emotional flood and how overwhelming that can be. I think for me, as I was thinking about this question, a lot of times I tend to focus on behavior, like when I'm thinking about what they're doing. Things that are really common that I see in behavior is after the emotional flood is either it's happening or it's starting to settle, you'll begin to see women take a couple different avenues. And not one of these is wrong. I just want to clarify that. It's not necessarily that it's wrong. It's just a direction that we might go in behavior. So one of them is to move in denial. which means this is way too much for me and there's no way I can handle this. So we're going to just act like this is not a problem. Of course, we could go in and unpack all the things that come with denial, but truly denial is a survival tactic, which we don't even recognize that we do. If you do any kind of work with other people, have ever experienced life with another person who's experienced massive trauma, denial is a part of their process because their body cannot manage that much input at one time. So it will shut itself down and act like it's not nearly as big as it is. But there's the denial aspect. I see the other side of this, especially I see this a lot in women, Christian women, is they are going to be the cheerleader and advocate. So they are going to come in and they're going to be his best friend and they're going to rock this out with him and they're going to find every book and every podcast and to really support him because he said he wants to get better. And so she moves into that place. And while it's not a wrong path. We're two becoming one. Of course, you're going to want to advocate for health and healing for this person that you love so much, who's essentially confessed or disclosed or whatever that looks like. They need help. They have a problem. And so that's another avenue that I see women go into. So denial, and then you see the cheerleader, and then you see the woman who just is like angry. Bonnie, like you talked about, like that third disclosure, like that rage. But sometimes that does happen. It doesn't take 3 disclosures to get to that phase, right? It took me about 4 minutes. That's how long it took me because I'm feisty like that. And I had, which I'm sure we'll talk in other podcasts, I had complex trauma. This wasn't my first betrayal in my life. And so I remember saying to my husband, you were never supposed to do this to me because I'd experienced so much betrayal in my childhood. Like he was my safe person. I brought, there was something in our agreement, even though that was never verbally said, that I was like, whoa, just blown up my paradigm of safety. And so I think that rage is another place that goes. And, a lot of times women who are moving into rage, really what it is it is a cry for help. They do not know what to do with themselves. And I know that for myself, when I moved into rage, a part of it was I thought if I get louder, you'll understand how big of a deal this is, right? If I go crazy town on you, you're going to pay attention. But on the outside, I just look like a lunatic. And I was completely not operating on who I was really meant to be. Those are some of the things that I see early on, like when I'm starting to connect with women who've just discovered things.
And I'd like to add another pattern is knowledge. I have, and I was one of these, and I have a couple of clients who are too. They are researchers. I'm telling you, they will find all there is to know about sex addiction, all there is to know about betrayal trauma. They are sponges, and that's just a form of protecting themselves from more trauma. If I know about it, I'll be prepared for it. And I wanted to mention my rage came from feeling very dishonored and disrespected because my life's work had up to that point been about helping other people understand what healthy, godly sexual intimacy looks like. Had he not been listening to me all those years?
Right.
Hello.
Yeah.
I guess not. So anyway, so that rage was from feeling disrespected. And I think that my identity loss, because I really felt that my sexuality and the sexual identity that I had, that was just broke.
Oh, I had that rage too. I think we need to say that anger is appropriate, right? It's okay to feel anger. What we do with it is important. But feeling anger, that could be a whole other podcast too, is all the myths we have around that it's not okay to be angry. It's certainly okay to be angry. And it's usually because something important, something sacred has been violated or there's been an injustice. My anger was from the disempowerment. How dare you take away my consent and my ability to make decisions about my life without having all the information. And I felt, you have stolen something from me. Not to mention subsequent relapses where, wait a minute, you've been in recovery. You're supposed to know better. You're supposed to have all the tools at your disposal, and you still didn't use them. And of course, there's a lot to unpack there. That was a cognitive distortion on my end, but that's what it looked like at the time. And so something sacred, my marriage, my heart, my feelings for you, all of these things are sacred things that are of value, and you have threatened them.
Mm-hmm. Pam, can you define cognitive distortion? Because some of our listeners may not really understand what that is.
Well, cognitive distortions also go under the name of automatic distorted thoughts or automatic unwanted thoughts. And they're very common in anyone who is having any anxiety, depression, and of course, trauma. It's basically lies we tell ourselves. Like, for example, well, I'm not going to ask my husband for what I need because he won't give it to me anyway. Well, that's fortune telling. Or, oh, my husband just came in and he has an angry look on his face. He's mad at me because I didn't fill up the car with gas and I said I was going to and I forgot. Well, that's mind reading. And so there's probably, I think, 10, 20 different categories of distorted thinking where we tell ourselves stories that aren't true, and those thoughts lead to emotions, and those emotions lead to behaviors. So if we can acknowledge, identify the cognitive distortions, turn them around to something more factual, then different feelings and emotions will result. Therefore, different behaviors will result. Very powerful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's move on to our next question, which is, what is the best thing a wife can do for herself immediately after discovering her husband's problematic sexual behavior?
Boundaries. Boundaries will help keep her safe, help keep her focused on herself, on her own thoughts, keep focused on her recovery, her movement forward, and not hyper-focus on her partner.
Do you have a good resource for boundaries? Aside from yourself, of course. And we will, and in the show notes, we will list all the resources we talk about, including our own links and where you can find us.
Absolutely. I've got a few. Vicki Tidwell Palmer, the 5-step boundary solution, is specifically for partners whose husbands are porn addicts or sex addicts. And they do need to be specific. Another general boundaries resource, which is awesome, is boundaries.me, founded by Dr. Cloud, who wrote the book Boundaries. That's a general resource.
It's also a faith-based resource, which a lot of women find to be really supportive, because I think sometimes when you hear the word boundaries, what you hear is division, and that can always feel complicated, right? I agree with Pam. I think boundaries is a great thing. I can't advocate enough for finding safe community, and it's a hard thing. And I know that women are trying to navigate it consistently. There's parts of them that wants to tell somebody, and then there's parts of them that it's like no one's safe to tell. I just have to advocate finding safe community that gets it and understands what it's like to navigate this. Doing things like Pam's Facebook page, incredible gift to be able to be in that safe space and connect with other women. I know that Naked Truth Project has an incredible weekly call that they do for support. I mean, they have a whole program, but just thinking about that initial step of beginning to be with others, because I think what starts to happen for us is we begin to feel completely alone. And if you know anything about the enemy, his strategy is to still, kill, and destroy. I see this really often when I watch relationship impacted by betrayal, because the husband, most likely, every woman would describe their husband, most of them, not all. He doesn't have a lot of relationships. If he does have friendships, they're not deep. They're just like high level fantasy football kind of people, not doing real life with people. So he's a loner. And what that's really saying is, hey, he's in isolation, right? He's not known very well. When you watch this type of addiction come up and it's in the light, and all of a sudden he's going into a guy's group and he's doing this and he's doing that, if he's doing those things, then suddenly she becomes a loner. And it's not intentional. A lot of times it's just out of protection. Like, I can't tell somebody this. Like, who's going to understand me? Or I did tell that friend and she couldn't relate, or she gave me some awful advice. God love our friends. Like, we wish that everybody was a carbon copy of ourselves so we could figure out how to do life well. But anyway, that would be one of the first things I would say is find the support. Because even with the boundaries, like Pam was saying, absolutely a must, like getting good, healthy boundaries in place. But a lot of times we don't know what boundaries are appropriate, or if it's even appropriate, or what if it's not a boundary? What if I'm making a demand? And being in good, healthy community can really help you find that validation and help you advocate and stick to what you've said, help you discover what are your values, because all those things play into good boundaries.
A good resource also is A Door of Hope.
Yeah.
And we should include that in the show notes too, lifeisahead.com, because they train peer facilitators specifically for support groups for sexual betrayal and the trauma. So there's some good resources there to get into a group there.
I also have a suggestion for groups for men. There's a Christian-based group called the Samson Society. You can find them on the internet, samsonsociety.com. They have a wives group that's called the Sarah Society. Again, website sarahsociety.com. They're both free.
In that same vein of Christian faith-based is a really great resource, great educational resource, workbooks, groups for men and women is puredesire.org.
Yes.
They have a 7 Pillars program. Not only is it faith-based, but it is trauma-informed too. So they do some really deep dives there. And for women, they have a program and a workbook called Betrayal and Beyond. Also trauma-informed, faith-based as well. Really great support that you can get in those groups.
My offering for what the best thing a wife can do is self-care. And self-care includes boundaries. It includes a safe community. And, I think self-care, pedicures, manicures, getting your hair done. I mean, those things are great and that they can be included in self-care as well. But when you're in trauma brain land, which truly is a biophysical manifestation, you need to eat as well as you can. If your appetite goes offline, you need to try to make yourself eat some small meals, nutritious meals during the day. If you tend to overeat, you want to kind of watch that, although I know that is a comforting technique. I'm not judging.
Thank you.
No judging, because food, and I'll be just real honest, food and alcohol are my go-tos, and I know alcohol's not the best for self-care. I like to encourage my ladies to find something that replenishes if not their joy, if they can't even think of joy, replenishes something that helps them feel contentment, help them feel satisfied in some small way, something that replenishes your soul. I want to give you permission to tend to yourself. It's very important.
Without explanation, justification, or guilt.
Absolutely.
Sometimes self-care is saying no to things. The extra volunteering for the classroom or for the church. Sometimes you have to step away from those extra things that you do. And, you don't have to view it as, I'm going to do this forever, but just for this season of your life where you need to ramp up your self-care just for a season.
I think that some of the missed self-care, like I love how you said, Bonnie, it's more than pedicures and all the things. Of course, it's eating well. It's a lot of those things. But if I could add even just another layer of self-care, because I want women to be able to explore what self-care looks like for them. I have such a tendency to try to replicate what I see others are doing and assuming it's successful for them. And that's not always the best route. If I could be honest, we're wonderfully made. So fearfully and wonderfully made. And so I just encourage women to not try to box their self-care in. I will tell you that in these seasons, specifically after relapses and slips, when things were emotionally heavy, I had lots of little kids in my house. We ate a lot of cereal and I rocked that out, y'all. But those were the things that I had to be honest and just say, I had to start like stripping off things that felt like they were priorities originally and just say, do I have to do this right now? Because here's the reality. If my husband would have died, priorities and expectations would have drastically shifted, right? I wouldn't have been expected to be on the PTA. I wouldn't have expected, delivering meals to people and all the things that I was into and doing. If that death would have happened, like a physical death, those things would have stopped. And I think that's the huge miss for women when we're navigating betrayal, is that don't look at this as a death, yet their body and their emotions are functioning as if it's a death.
Yes.
And we can't get those to line up. So if you're allowed to say, I've lost something here, you're going to show up and care for yourself different. So I think about the ways that I needed to, like I said, I was really good at cereal serving, but even my quiet time with the Lord, I was exhausted. I would attempt to open my Bible and be like, first of all, I don't even want to read this thing. And second of all, I don't even have the mental energy to actually process anything that I'm looking at. And so just for those, like what I ended up doing was, one, I cried out to the Lord and said, help me know how to spend time with you, because you know where I'm at. It's not like you're ignorant to my pain. And what it led me to was I bought one of those coloring Bibles. I just started a season of coloring. And if I'm honest with you, it was really easy because my kids were at a coloring age. So they could sit at the table and we could make it a thing. And it was easier for me to manage. And I just felt peace. And coloring got all this science behind coloring in and of itself for the mind. But that was self-care for me. So I went out and bought a whole new set of colored pencils, right? Like, so no, it wasn't a manicure, but it was something I needed to bring a small amount of joy to my world.
You were replenishing your soul.
Totally. And if I'm honest, it was really hard for me to see color in the world. Things were so heavy and so hard, and I was so exhausted that I wasn't noticing color. Does that make sense? And so I needed to be able to create. And that was another thing of self-care for me, is I'm a creative being. So I love to create. So that gave me that chance to do that too. So that's what comes to mind.
So, okay, we've hit some really tough things, and that's the nature of this. But there's a flip side. There is hope. That's why this is called Hope for Wives. So, what hope can we leave our listeners with?
Recovery works when you work it. I'll just say my own personal testimony that God can do immeasurably more than we can ever imagine. And when you're in your darkest moment at the beginning of this journey, you may not see any way out of this. How could you ever possibly survive personally? How could your relationship ever survive? But I'm here to tell you, God did a wonder in our lives. Our life, I'm a better person than I was before. Our relationship is much closer, more authentic, and more secure than it ever has been because we've done this work. And it's not just affected me personally and my relationship personally. We're also kind of rippling out to everybody else. There are gifts of recovery that we've been able to pass on to our son. Emotional management, how to ask for what you need, how to be authentic, and other people in our lives. And so don't give up hope.
It's my favorite topic to talk about, Bonnie. Can I share a long story?
Please do.
Okay.
I love your story.
The name of the ministry that I represent is Hope Redefined. And the name of that ministry came from my own story, because in the beginning, I put all my hope in my husband's men's group. That didn't work out so well because eventually he stopped going. And as we've already mentioned, there was relapses or slips and things like that about this accountability partner business. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, accountability partner, silver bullet. So accountability partner came around, ended up having his own relapse. Then all of a sudden it was like, okay, well, maybe it is about therapy. Maybe it's about this. Maybe it's about that. I was consistently looking for my hope to be in something. I have a really raw, vulnerable relationship with God, and he calls me out on my stuff. And I'm really thankful that he does. And there was one particular time I was journaling and he said, you know, Lachelle, you've put your hope in a lot of things, but you haven't put your hope in me. Ultimately, what I began to learn over the course of my journey was I wanted to heal so bad. And I thought that when my husband gets well, then I will get well. And so that's why I was putting my hope in all these tools for him to get better. But the truth is that my healing can happen completely apart from my husband's. I don't need my husband's health in order for me to be healthy. When I began to shift my focus and even my gaze at my husband's health, and I started looking to the Lord for my hope, like, what are you going to do with this? How are you going to heal me? How is this going to move forward? That's where my hope started to really come from the Lord. I could quote all the scriptures, by the way, like I could give you the hope is more my anchor, but I wasn't living it. And that was the shift for me, was that I needed to redefine where my hope was coming from. And so that's where Hope Redefined was birthed out of. That's my encouragement to any woman I get to sit with, any woman I get to connect with, is that you're worth healing, regardless of what happens in your marriage. Whether you stay together or not, you have a maker who is totally in love with you, totally blew me up. And you may not feel that in this moment, and that's okay. And you may be mad as all get out with him too. Totally get that. At the end of the day, when we place our hope in things above and not the things of this earth, it's going to matter. That's all I got.
What I would like to leave a hurting woman with is that, which is very similar to what you've just said, Lachelle, but kind
You
of
can't copy my answer.
I'm
Bonnie.
not. It's not. I'm not. This is mine. This is mine. That God will not let the pain and devastation that you're experiencing destroy you. Because I remember my first D-Day. I thought I was being sucked into a black hole. I thought I was disappearing. Partly, looking back, because I placed too much of my identity in my husband. But I didn't die. I recovered from that. And so even this last D-Day, told myself that over and over and over. It was like my mantra. God will not let the pain and devastation destroy me. He's here. He's holding me in his right hand. He's right here with me. And that's what got me through. So I want you to know that your future may look like a black void right now. You don't know what's going to happen. God does. God's already in your future. He's working things out. We don't know how. He's mysterious because you can never anticipate what he's going to do. Lots of mysteries and surprises, but he's there. He's working, and he won't let this destroy you. You know who wants this to destroy you? The enemy. Yeah. So we haven't talked a lot about him this episode, but he is active.
He's a loser, but he's not a quitter.
Yes.
And he loves this addiction because he loves shame, and he loves the isolation, and he loves that it separates us from God. And oh yeah, he cannot win this.
Hey, so thank you for sitting with us today. Our deepest desire is that you will find encouragement, insight, and maybe even a laugh or two in the many episodes to come. We will talk with you again in 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye.
Amen.
Bye.
Bye.